Hi everyone, my name is Cynthia. Let's talk books, and today I'm here to talk about my May wrap-ups, all of the reading that I did in May. In May I read 12 books, which is actually quite miraculous because in the first half of the month I was reading very little. That is for two reasons. One, because it was the last couple of weeks of the semester, and those are always the most hectic, more stressful, just the period in which I read less because I'm focusing on finishing up the semester and grading everything for my kids, making sure their grades are up and ready, especially for those that are graduating. But then I was also reading Midnight's Children in the first half of May, and that kind of stalled some of my reading. But then as soon as the semester was over, it also coincided with finishing Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. And then my reading I got so much reading done at the end of May. And now we're in June, so let's get straight to the books that I finished in May. The first one is The Ultimate Pi Day Party by Jackie Lau. This is book number 1 in the Baldwin Village book. I've read the first one in this series, Ice Cream Lover. Yes, and I actually have a dedicated video to that book, so I will link that down below if you're interested. I will also link Shannon's review of the series. She recently did a full review of the series, and she does a really wonderful job talking about all 3 books, so I will leave that down below. In this story, we're following 2 main characters. It's a male-female romance, and the hero is having a hard time connecting with his dad after a teenage unplanned pregnancy with his teenage girlfriend. And but the dad is a retired math teacher who loves Pi Day and always made a big deal out of it. So he decides that he's going to throw a Pi Day party at his job, and it turns out that our heroine happens to run a pie shop in town, and it's funny, it's cute. There's discussions of what it means to be a second or third generation, I think. The identity issues, interracial dating. There's also that discussion of that unplanned teen pregnancy, and there's a abortion storyline that had taken place in the past, and that I'm going to be doing a review of books that deal with that topic in romance novels. So this is one that I will probably be talking about in the future. But okay, super cute, really recommended. The next book that I finished in May was Alien Quarantine Rescue. This is book number 1 in what's going to be a series by Robin Lovett. If you don't want to read a romance novel set during a pandemic, you want to stay away from this one. But I first heard about this book from Costin over at Always Doing, and she just needed to mention this book, and I knew I had to read it. There's been a pandemic, and our main character lives alone. She's in contact with friends, but she's alone, and then an alien lands on her yard. It turns out that she and the alien are a perfect genetic match. There's ridiculous aspects to it, or really preposterous aspects to this book, but it was like the perfect thing that I needed when I was reading it. It was just it was a fun read. I didn't like every aspect of it. Some of the sexy stuff was not quite my cup of tea, but overall I am hooked on this series, and I am definitely waiting for the next one in the series. The next book that I finished in May was Wonder Woman Warbringer by Leigh Bardugo. This is actually my first Leigh Bardugo book. I haven't read any of her other books, and I don't know if this is indicative of how she writes or not, but this was a very solid read for me. I really like the character of Wonder Woman, and in this one you have a very young Diana who rescues somebody who was drowning from a shipwreck that had occurred right at the edge of where the island is located. And she saves this girl, but you're not supposed to, outsiders are not allowed in the island, and having saved this girl really disrupts geologically the island. And so Diana has to leave the island and it turns out that the girl she rescued is a Warbringer, somebody who is a descendant from Helen of Troy, and every generation in that bloodline there's somebody born who provokes war and conflict. And there is a group of people who are trying to kill this girl in order to prevent mass war and conflict. And Diana is hoping to save her and save the world. So really cute. It's a young adult, and honestly, reading this book was a reminder of why not every young adult completely works for me. Like, some stuff's just like, okay, clearly not written for my particular age group. But yeah, so this was just a solid read for me. The next book I finished was Ambiguity Machines and Other Stories by Vandana Singh, and this book was a recommendation from Shannon at That's So Poe. She read this book, and just hearing her describe it, I knew I had to read it, and it was so good. It is a series of short stories, sci-fi short stories, with a South Asian twist. There were elements that were very clearly South Asian. In almost every story, there's always a main South Asian character, and on top of it, several of the stories were making very clear references to the Ramayana, which is an ancient Indian epic, Hindu epic, although there are versions of it that are also Buddhist. And I just, at the same time that I was reading this, I was reading Midnight's Children, and most of the time, I wanted to keep reading this book instead. A lot of the themes in these short stories are about, what it means to be human, but also how important community is, and what it means when a human, or what happens when a human is alone for whatever reason, alone in space, alone in different settings, just a loneliness, what loneliness does to a person, and the importance of community. And I really loved every short story that had that theme. Those were the ones that resonated the most for me. And this was just a really, really good set of stories. Next, I read The Empress of Salt and Fortune, and this is a story that I'm gonna need to reread, because I was in a weird mental state when I was reading this, but I really, really loved it. You have a kind of oral historian, someone who collects oral stories, who is listening to the handmaiden of the former Empress tell the story of the Empress, and it was amazing. You're hearing it is essentially a royalty story, but through the eyes of one of the aides, right? The Empress's aides. And I just really, really enjoyed this one. I'm definitely planning on reading the next book in this series. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back, reread this one, and then read the second one, because I think this is one of those books that just needs to be reread. And also just because of the mental state I was in, I feel like I need to reread it so I can catch more of what I missed in this first reading of it. Then I read Midnight's Children by Salman Rushdie. I think I pretty much said what I need to say about Midnight's Children. It's a book that's either genius or just dumb. It made me feel so dumb. I'll leave it at that. If anybody's interested, I'll link the video that I did on this book just last week. Next, after Midnight's Children, I really needed a brain cleanse, and so I decided to pick up a middle grade book. Usually I pick up romance when I need a reset in my reading, but this time I went to middle grade, and it worked really well for what I needed it to do. So I picked up Dead Voices by Katherine Arden. This is book number 2 in the Small Spaces series. So it's a middle grade horror story. And I keep being awed by middle grade and how great of a job writers who write in this genre do. This is legitimately scary. I find the middle grade horror stories scarier than adult horror stories. And this one takes the same kids from the first book to a secluded ski resort where they are trapped and there are ghosts. That's all you need to know. And yeah, I really enjoyed that one. It was a great read. Next, I read Beach Read by Emily Henry. This was a book that my sister had recently read, and she like texted me, was like, you need to read this book. And I was like, okay, I need her to take some of my recommendations, so I need to also take her recommendations. But this is really great. I actually ended up finishing this book in 2 sittings. It was just so engrossing. I think it's kind of sold as a romance story, but it's definitely, it has the romance elements, but it deals with very heavy issues. You have the main character who's a writer, who's a romance writer, but she's got like writer's block, and she hasn't been able to finish a book that's due to her publisher, in part because she just learned a big secret her dad had. Her dad just passed away, and his secret life is revealed. So she is at this beach cabin trying to figure out her life. She's run out of money, and she needs to get this book written and sold. And it turns out that her next door neighbor is a writer as well, who writes hard-hitting literature. And so there's those discussions between that debate between people who love romance and people who kind of look down at romance. Those were great to read and to have those interactions. The hero in the story is a total grump, kind of seems to like hate life, and the heroine is Little Miss Sunshine, but is going through a period in which she's not Little Miss Sunshine. Like she's not. Her positive outlook on life is just not there because of everything she's learned about her father. Anyways, it was a good compelling read. Next, I finished Simone de Beauvoir's The Woman Destroyed. So this is a series of 3 short stories, and I've decided I'm going to do a dedicated review to this video. This is going to be part of my Reading the French Classics series, so watch out for that coming up in my channel. But the short version is that in each of these stories, you have a woman later in life really looking back at her life and looking at their lives in the moment and trying to understand and figure out what has happened, how they got to the point where they are, looking at the relationships, either analyzing the relationships that they're in or the relationships that they've had, how they've been successful or not, relationships with children, disappointments, and at times just like catastrophe. There's something big that is happening in each of their lives that it causes them to reevaluate life choices, and I found each story amazing in its own way. So if you're interested in hearing more, watch out for that video coming right up on my channel. Next, I read Anxious People by Fredrik Backman. This was the book club pick for my book club, and I haven't read anything from Backman before, but I was pleasantly surprised by this book. It's the story of really good people trapped in really bad situations, and the main theme that stood out to me in this book was the importance of making space for mistakes, of being generous, and of trying to understand people and not judging them by the worst day of their lives. Every single person in this book kind of makes one or several big mistakes, but they are all genuinely good people, and they are very anxious people, as the title tells us. I enjoyed reading this book quite a bit. I think I didn't necessarily love it, but I really enjoyed it, and I would definitely read Backman again. I haven't read Bear Town, but I have Bear Town, so I know that one is one that a lot of people really love of his, so it's on my TBR already. And second to last, I listened to the audiobook of Cleopatra Alive by Stacy Schiff. This is a book that I first heard Brian over at Bookish talk about. I believe he read it for the BookTube prize, and I love the story of Cleopatra. I teach the story of Cleopatra in my classical civilizations class, and I do a little bit with her in my world history class. So this is the history I know well, so I wanted to see, you know, how this book handled all of that. And I didn't necessarily, well, I didn't learn anything new from this book, or very few things in this book were actually new to me because I know the history so well. But it's still a really good book, and I think that if you're interested in learning about Cleopatra and this period in history, then this is a good book because it's the narrative, like it's told in a very narrative way, so that you're listening to a story, right, rather than just getting historical facts. And it's also a really interesting period because her life coincided with that transition in Roman history between a Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. And what's tricky about writing anything about Cleopatra is that we really don't have anything written in her voice. We have a sentence of like 2 or 3 words. And we have coins that she minted that have her image. But other than that, what we have written about her was all written from a male Roman perspective. And so she was cast as a seductress who seduced Julius Caesar and should seduce Mark Antony and led to their downfall. And I'm like, yeah, that is giving her a lot of power, and also like reducing her to a cliche in history when she was a complex person. She was a female ruler who did important things during her rule. We don't have any evidence of any like political issues or, you know, political dissent during her reign. She was generally a well-received queen. But anyway, I could go on and on kind of giving you all a lecture on the history of Cleopatra. It's a really fascinating story of her life, and trying to really figure out what we can actually take from what's been written about her, what is actually true, and what was just a very misogynistic Roman viewpoint. Because for the Romans, it was unfathomable that a woman could rule and rule successfully, because in Rome, women didn't have that kind of status. They were not allowed that kind of status. But in Egypt is actually one of the ancient civilizations where women had the most options and the most freedom. Think if I were to travel in time as a woman, I would want to be in ancient Egypt or in Persia, like one of these places where women had more options. Anyway, this was a wonderful read, and I do recommend it if you're interested in learning about Cleopatra and the end of the Roman Republic. The last book that I finished in May was Survivor by Octavia E. Butler. I read it along with the Octavia E. Butler Slow Read Readathon. I've been trying to participate in this ever since the beginning, and it hadn't matched up because of my teaching and all of that. I just hadn't been able to read a book with them, and I finally was able to, and this is an amazing book. First off, what you need to know about this book is that Octavia E. Butler did not allow it to be reprinted. It turns out at actually the live show for the Slow Read-a-thon, and I will link that video down below. And an expert came in and told us that Octavia Butler, when she sold this book, was like she really needed money so she could keep writing and continuing the research she was doing, and so she just needed this book sold. And so the reason why she never allowed it to be reprinted was because it wasn't where I wanted to be. She hadn't done enough editing. The story wasn't where it was supposed to be. I guess she called it like her Star Trek book, because it was full of like a Star Trek version of space travel and space life. And because it's an imperfect book, it's really fascinating and layered. Like all of her books are super layered and complex. And so there were things in here that are a bit off-putting. Like there's a lot of misogyny in here, and like a normalization of like domestic abuse in the alien civilization that we meet. But we're following a main character who before the story begins, is kind of a wild human. This is a world in which humans, there's been a plague, has devastated humans, and she is caught, our main character is caught stealing from a missionary. The leader of the missionaries decides to take her in and adopt her. So she grows up in this, she spends some time in this missionary community before they decide that they are leaving Earth and going to a planet where they encounter two warring factions in this planet, and they get caught in the middle. The missionaries, because they're missionaries, had a very narrow view of the universe and what it means to be human versus animal. And our main character does not. She is somebody who's a survivor, as the title tells us, and is what has allowed her to survive in all the settings she's been in is the fact that she's so adaptable, that she's so willing to adapt and to view things so much more clearly than like the missionaries, for example. It is such a layered book. As I'm talking about it, I'm like, maybe I need to just do a dedicated review of this book because there's just so much to explore, so many really awesome themes that I think a lot of people would like. But it's also a book that can be tough to get a hold of because it was never reprinted. So yeah, I feel like I did some really good reading in the month of May, and then also some odd things in there. Cough, Midnight's Children cough. But yes, let me know if you've read any of these books. If you want to add something, because obviously I can't get to every theme in every book in these wrap-ups. So let me know if you'd like to hear any more about these books. I'm happy to have a chat with anyone and everyone down in the comments section, and let me know how your May reading went. It was an odd month for me, but ultimately good. So thank you so much for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.